Welcome to the Voices of Young People podcast, brought to you by Springtide Research Institute. In each episode, we hear directly from young people as they respond to our research and share about the issues impacting their lives. As sociologists and researchers, we see a new story unfolding for young people, one that moves beyond traditional institutional boundaries and requires careful attention to the inner and outer lives of emerging generations. At the intersection of being and becoming, it's the Voices of Young People.
Hello, everyone. This is season 9 in the Voices of Young People podcast, and I'm your host, Marte Aboagye. I'm the head of community engagement at Springtide Research Institute, and we're continuing this really interesting series where we're talking to youth and young adults about their civic engagement, about what they think about politics, who influences some of their political ideas and beliefs and values. And we have 2 Springtide ambassadors joining us again for today's conversation. One is our SAP, that's the shorthand for the Springtide Ambassadors Program, our SAP Leadership Fellow. He's been with us since we launched SAP in 2020. And then someone who's in our 2024 cohort as well. So let's have that member go first. Aimee, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Aimee. I'm 23 years old and from California. I studied marketing in college and am now working in advancement for a state university. And in my free time, I like to watch 2000s TV shows, and I also really enjoy singing with other people.
I love that you love music, Aimee. It's something I've come to learn about you. We like a lot of the same musicians and artists even. I'm curious, though, about your 2000s television, because we haven't discussed that. What are a show or two that you enjoy from the 2000s?
Yeah, early in my college years, I tend to discover things long after they were popular. So I got into the show Teen Wolf, which I didn't expect to like, but actually really did. But another show that kind of stands out is The OC, which is also set in Southern California, and it's just funny to see places that I recognize and interesting characters too.
Totally. Well, what's funny is The OC was on when I was in college in Southern California, Aimee. So it was like people were having watching parties because there wasn't streaming services yet. So you actually had to like watch the show in real time when it came on. And you could hear that the song is so catchy. The California theme song at the beginning of you would hear that coming down the hall of the dorm rooms when people were all tuning in together. So I love that because it's a nostalgic memory for me from going to school in undergrad. But I love that you appreciate it later on as well. So the OC still has a life. And Teen Wolf. That's why I have not watched Teen Wolf, but I have heard many people describe it as like kind of a cult classic for them.
You know, the characters between the shows are actually more similar than you'd expect.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And actually the OC has even informed some of my music taste too.
There's some good soundtrack. Yeah. To the OC episodes besides the theme song already being so catchy. I love it. Christian, we'll have you go next to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Hello, my name is Christian. I'm 25 years old, currently living in Tennessee. I've completed my bachelor's in political science, and I'm currently working towards my master's in special ed. With all that, also working in campus ministry at my local Catholic university. A fun fact about me that tends to kind of spin heads is I currently live in a religious community. I am the youngest person in there, and the oldest person is 101 years old.
My goodness, I didn't know you had a centurion amongst you. Yeah.
Yes, and he turns 102 in December, so definitely a blessing.
That is so cool. Yes, you live a really rich intergenerational life, Christian. So many people are just surrounded by their own age group. I mean, college is definitely built that way. Often faith communities are that way. Aimee, in other conversations we've had, I've heard you mention that your faith community is pretty intergenerational, but that's not always the case. You know, sometimes it's just young families or just college students or just, older retirees. So that brings a lot of valuable input when you're regularly interfacing with people from generations beyond your own. You got several generations in your existence, Christian. That's really cool. I love that you studied politics in your background, but you're in this graduate program for special education now, which is so cool, Christian. So let's get into this politics conversation. The first thing I want to know is, when you hear the word politics, what immediately comes to mind? What are those first impressions, Christian?
Honestly, the first time I hear politics, I just imagine a blue suit with a tie, with somebody who's either red or blue tie. That comes to mind when I think of politics. When I think of a term like civic care, it brings to mind sustainable aid, not just one thing in particular, but sustainability. So week in, week out, kind of caring for the community. That extends past just food insecurity. Down here in Tennessee, there are a lot of food drives. But when I think of civic care, I think of food drives, but also healthcare, also everything down to voting rights. That's what pops into my head.
Wow, that's cool. That's really cool. The juxtaposition you have there. It's part of why we called the report Cultivating Care. We wanted it to encompass more than just the blue suit, red tie image or whatever is that first image that comes to mind for people. So I like what you said about sustainable care that more encompasses all different aspects of society. Love to hear the same for you, Aimee. When you hear politics, what are those first impressions?
I think the word in itself just feels kind of contentious. Like, it carries a lot more baggage than I think it might need to. And so it's interesting that you made that choice to name the report in a different way that might carry less of those connotations for people. I think what also comes to mind for me is using the word in the sense of the workplace or even the church politics, workplace politics.
Sure.
And I'd read this ministry book, and it said, when a lot of people use the word politics in that context, what they actually mean is relationships. So I think in the same way you use the word civic care, it's really more about issues that affect people and things that they care about.
Yeah. I love that you're thinking of politics beyond just like electoral politics, that you're able to identify politics in so many other groups and settings, and that you also feel that distinction between politics and civic care. That's what really we heard from young people all across the nation, that they were like, what we're talking about here when it comes to furthering society, making a difference in our own communities, politics doesn't get at it. Like, that doesn't actually encompass what we heard from so many young people in our interviews and in our surveys. So thank you for setting up the conversation in that way. Do you consider yourself to be civically engaged?
I think lately, for me, like as I mentioned, what I believe civic engagement is, I think it in a way delves more into local politics, not kind of statewide politics. I would say, unfortunately, lately I have not. I've been more community civically engaged. I'm more focused on those around me, which pops up later on in our conversation. But I, in a way, I feel as I'm talking here, I kind of feel like maybe I should be a little bit more. But naturally, I think with me, as I mentioned, I live in a religious community. I'm able to kind of open myself up more to those around me. I faithfully, I can say there's about 100 or 150 students that I will see on let's say a monthly basis, each and every day. And with them, I take the time to know what is affecting them, have it be financially, have it be personally. And just with the nature of my position in campus ministry, also spiritually. And with that, it comes a lot of kind of the things happening in our communities. So some people might, they have family members that are suffering from deportation, or let's just say they got pulled over by the police officer, and now they have a $1,200 ticket because they had their high beams on. I mean, I may have been guilty of having my high beams on one time, but
ticket for that. Wow.
yeah, but naturally, I find my opportunity to work with them more relationally as being civically engaged.
Yeah.
But if I was back in my hometown of Pennsylvania, I would want to be, in City Hall, knocking on doors, talking to congresspersons. That's what I imagine civically engagement to be. So I would say right now I am not. To conclude my part, I want to say that after I graduated college, life got pretty serious for me pretty quickly. So I kind of had to more focus on myself. And I think as I go more towards working for the wider community, I think it's important for me to start with what I can handle.
Totally makes sense. But I also love that you're expansive to see the ways that it's not only talking with elected officials and knocking on doors, that it's also the ways you're coming alongside people in your own community setting, like you said. Aimee, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like you're civically engaged? Do you consider yourself to be that type of person?
For me, I would say this is a yes and no.
Okay.
I actually relate to a lot of what Christian said about being more community engaged than necessarily kind of in a broader sphere, especially during the pandemic. Prior to that, my family would watch the news every night. Felt like I had a better idea of what was going on in the world. At some point, I really tuned out and disengaged. It just felt like too much to see every day. And so there was quite a long time where I really did not keep track of the news. And it's only been more recently that I've started to reincorporate that, and at the very least skim headlines just to be aware of what's going on in the world and locally. There are some things that I'll engage with. So I get a lot of emails about different petitions for different issues. I'll read through those, sign those. One thing that Christian said, which hit me, was that after graduation point, and I think I'd read something recently that said that really it's young people, especially in college, who lead a lot of the social movements in our world. And I think a lot of it could be to what Christian is saying, that after graduation, kind of quote unquote life happens, and there's so many more responsibilities. And so it really is often those people in college, not that they don't have other responsibilities, but maybe they have a little more time and space to engage with those things, especially if they choose to. And that's especially why we shouldn't be dismissing those young people for voicing those opinions and getting out there and trying to make changes, even if it seems idealistic. I think there was a line in Suzanne Collins's Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and it was something like, what young brains lack in experience, they sometimes make up for in idealism. So, but at the same time, young people do have a lot of experiences. And so not to dismiss that or idealism, which can be a good thing and really drive us towards better.
We need some idealism. Otherwise, we might feel just too hopeless or unmotivated to push for changes, to call out certain systems or injustices. So the energy of the young people, I think, is really, really needed, and the passion as well. But I also love the ways that you both are like, you're out of undergrad, you're either considering grad school or beginning grad school, you're in your early careers, and you already see a noticeable difference from what it looks like to be, a 20-something post-graduation to looking a few years back when you're in school and maybe had different time capacity to engage, and that your engagement evolves is what I'm hearing as well. And it goes through different fluctuations through different seasons of life. Is there a particular issue, social or political issue, that you especially care about? And when did you start caring about it? Why this issue? Does it matter to other people that you're surrounded by? Love to hear more.
I wanted to preface this to say, because it kind of leads more into my response, but I tend to have just a fascination with the Supreme Court. Especially within, let's say, the last 2 weeks, there have been a lot of Supreme Court cases coming out. And I have been all over my phone reading the decisions. I even got a notification this morning with my alarm clock that there's going to be a big court case set today. So I'm kind of antsy to see that. However, I'm very interested in the opioid epidemic. That is all around the country. There are hot spots in certain cities. Some cities have a growing epidemic. But, I was thinking about it right before this call. Why the opioid epidemic? And mostly because the opioid epidemic leads also into mental health crises, as well as homelessness.
Yeah.
And through those, there also are avenues of immigration and housing issues.
Yes, there are.
So all of it encompasses under kind of this, I don't want to say the start, but in a way, a pivotal piece, the opioid epidemic. I started caring about this issue a lot in high school. When I would commute back and forth to school, I would see a lot of people who were, under the influence.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't, to me, I felt for them.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, part of a religious community, so I took more spiritual practices within it. Let it be praying for them, let it be talking with them. So that kind of gave me a nice foundation for what I want to kind of focus my energy on. There have been conversations in my home state about the topic of safe injection sites.
Mm-hmm.
However, what I've learned is the societal opinion on these injection sites have been strictly against, leaving me really with the conclusion that addressing the epidemic, unfortunately, is not ready to be discussed yet from communities, especially communities that are affected by them the most. It's one of those things that allows for me to see how important it is that we care for our neighbors, care for our communities. Because I will say, I do not have somebody in my family who has been directly affected by the opioid epidemic. However, I have countless friends who have family members who are either injured or have lost their lives because of it. So it's a problem because there are some who are not directly impacted by the epidemic that necessarily do not, have that attachment to it. So naturally, the ones who are affected, they are the ones who are on the front lines. They are the ones who are protesting. They are the ones who are going to the Supreme Court and holding these companies responsible. And not to get into the decisions, but unfortunately, it seems that, we are going to have to wait another year before maybe we have a more comfortable answer. Because, yes, there are many avenues that need to be addressed, the opioid epidemic being one that kind of branches off into many different injustices. But that's where I settle down with it. And even with me being away from home, now that I live in Tennessee as opposed to Pennsylvania, I'm still very interested in how it's being addressed in my hometown. But even back here in Tennessee, it's not that big of an issue, but it is prevalent. Right now in Tennessee, food insecurity seems to be the growing issue. But with food insecurity, a lot of people tend to turn to drug use. So that's where I land on that.
Thank you. Thank you for all the intersections that you highlighted, but also just for your deep care for this real epidemic that, like you said, hits all across the country and often is more pronounced in different communities and different areas. But the ways that this has stuck with you since high school is really profound as well. When I know you care about a lot of issues, but that this one still rises to the top of deep care and concern. Aimee, I'm curious to hear about a social or political issue that especially matters to you.
When I reflect on my formative years, one that really jumps to mind is gun violence.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting happened around the time I was in elementary school.
Yeah.
And there was a college shooting that was kind of in the neighborhood of where my brother was going to college at the time. And so I think those have really stuck with me. They kind of live in the back of my mind wherever I'm moving around the world. But I think when it comes to other issues, I remember watching this video by this spoken word artist. His name's Prince EA. And basically, he talked about a lot of the issues in the world. And the message of his video was that there won't be people to have these issues if we don't care for the environment. So he really put a lot of emphasis and priority on environmentalism as well. And also, as I reflect on my time in school, I realized that a lot of the issues I care about are the ones I've been exposed to and have the awareness of. Sure. And so whether it's through media, TV shows that have brought my attention to things, or just having teachers who encouraged different research projects into different social, political issues, giving students the time, as we were talking about earlier, to really explore, delve into the different sides, make an informed opinion. I really appreciated that time. And I think both Christian and I have expressed, with the fluctuations in different seasons, now also having a desire to kind of renew that engagement.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you're thinking back to what issues impacted you or hit you from younger years. It's not just what is present right now, that you're able to say, like, gun violence has been a common thread through many different ages, whether you as a young kid or, worrying about your brother when he was in college. These different school shootings end up being like signposts that we can look back and sadly measure different moments in life by. That there's too many, period. But like the fact that there could be these many significant signposts. And then also what you said about the environment, that it's like how many things hinge on whether we even have a livable, healthy planet for all. So it's really cool that you're also able to say there's different moments in life that have stuck with you and the ways that you want to further those going forward. So as I mentioned earlier, we did interviews with young people all across the country for our mixed methods research for this series that we have, The State of Religion and Young People, this year specifically looking at civic engagement. So from the 80 plus interviews, we have so many compelling quotes, and they don't always all make it into our reports. So we wanted to bring some into the podcast conversation, almost like a third young person's voice being added. So I'm going to read a quote from Camilla, age 23, and then I'd love to hear what Aimee and Christian have to say about Camilla's thoughts here. Camilla said, yes, I think political apathy is something that's honestly dangerous. And I'm saying this as someone that was politically apathetic, right? And so knowing what I know how dangerous a lack of understanding is. And I think just like not knowing anything made me a worse person generally. But also just it's something that governs our world. It's the laws that we have in place. I feel like it's something that's so foundational that more people should care about it and care about the things that are happening. I feel like we do have a lot of political apathy because it is something that is hard to understand and it's stressful and it's taboo to talk about. And there's so many different opinions. But I think those are obstacles that need to be overcome so that we can at least start some process. And I think maybe going back to education, it's something that should be taught more about. I can't even remember what I learned about the government except that there's 3 branches. I feel there should be more education, maybe on engagement and civic engagement and how to even get involved or how to start understanding all that beyond just its basic form. Yeah. What comes up for you when you hear that quote?
I just want to say I am extremely grateful for the inclusion of education in this quote.
Sure.
Mostly that could just be the teacher within me
Sure.
saying that. But it's because it's true. One thing that pops up for me that I wish could be an opportunity, and I feel like this might be a little bit too much, but similar, if there was some form of educational segment on the branches of government on a nationwide program, I'm talking about naming the 3 branches, who those people are, and if there was a way for it to say, okay, well, here is your congressperson, here is your senator. There could be an opportunity for people to stand up for what the Constitution is based on. And with education, I think it's important that, we understand what needs to be known. I mean, if we are around election season and we are learning the definition of, let's say, filibuster, well, that's not necessarily important. Mostly because we want to know, what the platforms they're running on and what they want for their society. However, you should have the right to know who is going to Washington, calling you a constituent. We hear our politicians say, my constituents, my constituents. But these people should know your name and your family. I can say more on a local level, the congressperson from back in my hometown, I went to go meet that person and they spoke to me as if I was their best friend, which was a little, to me, not promising, mostly because I thought, well, you don't know who I am and you are allowing my community to struggle. And we always hear people say, oh, that's a diplomatic answer, that's a political answer, or that's a very diplomatic response. It wasn't until I entered that office of my congressperson where I understood that, unfortunately, some of the stuff that I was saying, even though they were saying, oh, we did that, they in fact did not. So I really appreciate the necessity for education. And I think even though we say, political apathy is maybe something to be feared of or dangerous, I think also political empathy should be important because let's say we have a family member who doesn't know who they want to vote for or what is a Republican Party, a Libertarian Party, a Democratic Party. I think it's an importance of us to say, hey, why don't you sit down? Let me show you this quick little, this quick little video I found on YouTube that explains politics in 5 seconds, which probably isn't as, you need a little bit more than that, but it's at least you're showing that person, hey, I care for you and I care for us. Let's work together so we can both stand on the front lines together.
Christian, I really like that instead of it just being left to each individual person to not be politically apathetic, that you're seeing a communal response to saying, I'm going to come alongside someone and discuss this or provide a resource that's an on-ramp to learning more and do it together instead of being like, that person's politically apathetic, they're wrong. well, okay, like let's engage. Like that's such a beautiful way of being civically engaged to accompany someone, whether they're your age or from another generation, to discuss these things together. Is a really cool way of going about education, instead of just saying, well, the school should be better, but like, how can we be the change we want to see? How can we do that ourselves? That's a really wonderful way of looking at this quote. Aimee, what are your thoughts from Camilla's words?
Camilla's whole quote reminded me of this post that I had seen, and it said, "What's the difference between ignorance and apathy?" And it said, "I don't know and I don't care." And even though she speaks to political apathy, what I actually see is just not necessarily feeling informed or aware.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe not knowing how to go about finding that information or awareness.
Sure.
And so actually the second part of her quote kind of answers some of that when she speaks to education. Really that would help with that part about feeling unsure or like, I don't know.
For sure. You guys are thinking about education expansively instead of just like, well, if you didn't get in high school, sorry. Like that was your one shot at learning this civic engagement, or all the ways that government is structured, et cetera. That like education can be community driven, it can be relational, it can be a lifelong endeavor that we do together. Not just have people be stuck in ignorance or be stuck in apathy, either place, but to do this together, which is so hopeful. I'm going to ask you at the end if you feel hopeful or fearful about society, but both of your answers make me feel hopeful in this moment, at least. I want to know quickly, just throw out who or what has influenced you politically. Are they people, faces, books? What is it?
I think my response is going to be kind of funny in a way, because I listen to comedy podcasts and everyone who is in the news for trying to change the status quo of upper class Americans. I need some form of laughter in order for me to accept the reality of politics. I know politics is serious, but I learned very early in my, let's say, aspirations to work in politics, that just being able to take a deep breath and say, okay, let's see what this is really about. That is important for my mental health.
Totally.
The day of the 2020 election, I had to walk around my community park, because I was just so upset with the news. We didn't know who was chosen the day after the election. So just that, unsettledness, I needed to go for a walk. However, a couple months later after that, I found some comedy podcasters and, some really influential people. And I said, you know what? I'm going to listen to this, but I'm going to take it with me to say, that's my way to look at it in a different light, more of a brighter light, not just saying, oh, I can't do anything. It's to say, well, if I can't do anything right now, at least I can bring to my family to have them understand what's going on.
I love that. I love the levity that you're speaking to, and just maybe sometimes the approachability of a comedian discussing these things compared to like an academic or some talking head that people feel like is not relatable in any way. So that's a really cool answer. And I haven't heard that one yet, but you're right. There's a lot of comedians who are talking about these issues. Aimee, who or what has influenced you politically?
I'm just remembering this elementary school paper that I had, and it was a little thing you would color, and it said, if I was president, and you would write different statements about things you would do if you were president. And I think I did this in second grade. And I remember there's just so many statements that I wrote that were things that I probably picked up from home, just kind of repeated from hearing from family. I still hold a lot of those values today. And so, as I look at this question, who, what has greatly influenced you politically, I realize that it's the same people who influenced me in other parts of my life.
Sure.
It's family, friends. Like Christian said, I also enjoy a good political commentary,
Mm-hmm.
Books, teachers, media, TV shows that bring issues to light.
Yeah.
Everything is connected.
Yeah. It sounds like the people or sources that you trust to weigh in on different aspects of your life, or that you see as imparting guidance in some way, that translates to what you think about politics as well. What I'm hearing from you, they aren't like separate spheres.
I've also appreciated the people who bring a differing and challenging perspective.
Well, that's not everyone always has that or feels that desire. We know that sometimes people only want to talk to folks who share their view or affirm what they're already thinking. So that's cool that you want to be challenged or hear different voices that might have a really different perspective from you. I know you both talk to people from other generations. You've already mentioned that in some ways. What can folks who are beyond Gen Z and older, Christian's already mentioned that he, lives with someone who's above 100 even, any older generations, what can they do to show that they want to foster open, constructive dialogue when it comes to politics?
I think this is just a good practice in general, but this idea of listening to understand rather than to respond, and also asking questions, not to necessarily challenge or debate, but really get at, why do you believe that? Why is this important?
Thank you. Christian?
Aimee took the words right out of my mouth. Yes, listening to understand, not listening to respond. I think that is easily one of the most important things that those who are not a part of our generation can take in. Because in a way, maybe it's saying, well, something that didn't work, let's say 30, 40 years ago, maybe it can work today. Similar to what I mentioned earlier, the safe injection sites. I know it was brought up. I did some research on it a couple of years ago, but it wasn't the first time it's ever been brought up to politics. So in a way, just because it didn't work, let's say in the 80s or 70s, now that we have kind of more of a technological, in advancement, maybe this can work.
Sure.
So I think it's important to just listen. Providing feedback, I think, is important, but it's important to provide feedback that is uplifting, helping, us young people say, I hear what you're saying. Why don't you do this, this, and this? Or why don't you research this, this, and this? Because I feel once we have that kind of somebody pushing against us, that's when we say, okay, well, you're obviously not listening. You were just listening to respond.
Do you think that your spirituality or faith life, worldview, does it influence your politics? And in what ways, if so?
I actually feel somewhat resistant to my religion's role in politics. So I identify as Christian, and I think that when people think of Christian, they think of certain politics, and those often aren't the ones I identify with. And so even attending a Baptist church, I hesitate to join as a member only because I wouldn't necessarily want to identify myself with those kind of beliefs that people typically think of.
Yeah, I get that. There's a lot to define or unpack instead of just having certain labels. People think, oh, well, A equals B. When you're like, that's not always the case. Yeah, that's a helpful perspective. Christian, how do you feel about spirituality and politics?
I actively try to differentiate the two. I think deep down, I would say I am a liberal, very liberal Catholic. However, when I think about it out loud, or when I think about it more deep, it's like, oh, I don't know if those two can go together. But naturally, because I respect the Constitution, and I respect the Holy Bible. I'm not going to make strides to change them because I feel that those two are two different things. And incorporating the both of them into each other, I feel it's a very slippery slope that hinders the what's the capital of each of them. So I don't find any influence on them. If anything, I know that if I were to put the two and two together, I would have some very, my internal dialogue would be fighting with each other. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I really appreciate both of your responses. We get such a range of answers when it comes to this one, which is cool that young people are thinking about this in a lot of different ways that they often don't get credit for, especially in public conversations where people are quick to dismiss Gen Z. But you both are thoughtful in so many ways. With that, I'm curious what two 20-somethings have to say about if you feel hopeful or fearful when it comes to the direction of society.
I will just say I was hoping we would skip over this question because I feel that my response is very pessimistic, but I hope that it's understood with a caring heart. My response is I'm fearful. As I mentioned, I like the Supreme Court, but when I look at it, it holds 6 Republican appointed judges, 3 appointed in the last 7 years, with the oldest judge being under the microscope of a potential bribery, another who is in strict predisposition on cases that affects the leader of the political party that recommended him to the court. I asked myself, where can I find hope in a dying tree containing branches that destroy each other and refuse to work for the enhancement of its own ecosystem? The Supreme Court is an office that strengthens the presence of the Constitution we've held so close to us since 1788. However, judges do not know their own limits. They can use their seat for more harm than good. With that, I've moved my focus to the greater good and will make strides to create a community for those around me. Recently, I watched the movie Selma, and when the march from Selma to Montgomery occurred over Edmund Pettus Bridge, watching them all be beaten and injured by white police officers reflects the deaths of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. The corruption that I believe occurs in the police, as well as our own political officials, have exploded into social media and grows this presence of anger from not being heard. To be honest, I only tend to find hope in work that is targeted at a particular audience. Let's say for a certain city, a state, and for a country, it would be a little bit more difficult. There's too much history and too many people who will pray for one's downfall and then shake their hands from the top. I'm sorry, but I'm very fearful.
I hear that. Thank you, Christian.
I hear my parents talk about how politics before there seemed to be a greater respect for the other side, more reaching across the aisle, less of a kind of polarization between two sides. In that way, I'm somewhat discouraged by what we see today. However, when I remind myself of the, young people, activists, people who are still idealists, still hoping for change, working towards it, I'm encouraged. And just because our audience tends to have a bit of a more religious lean, I would just share this verse, which I feel like the heart of is relevant. 1 Timothy 4:12, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. And so for all those who are examples in speech, examples in conduct, in love and faith. I would just hope that we would not dismiss them because they are young.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But really lean in and listen to understand.
You've both given so many good gems throughout this whole conversation that I hope different trusted adults really take away, really hear deeply. If you could give one last message, what would be your message you want the world to know about young people and politics?
I will say we are making so much noise that major studios can hear our opinions through their soundproof rooms. Do not count us out yet. Come work with us. We will not turn our backs on you. Instead, we will give you the shirt that we have on our backs.
Thanks, Kristen. Aimee, what would be your message?
Well, I think it's valuable to look at the differentiations between different age segments. I would just say young people are people too.
Yeah. Right? Right? So you've heard Christian, you've heard Aimee describe their own influences, their own passions, and really a message of to not dismiss someone based on their age, especially when it comes to civic engagement. Thank you both for such thoughtful conversation. I really appreciate your ideas and input here, and I know people are going to take away a lot from this. Thanks, Aimee. Thanks, Christian.
Thank you.
Visit springtideresearch.org to hear more voices of young people and to learn about the latest research and resources available, along with Cultivating Care, how and why young people participate in civic life. Springtide Research Institute is dedicated to listening to young people and sharing critical research and actionable insights from what we learn. Visit our website to find ways to support our work and discover ways that we can support yours. You can find us and follow us on social media at We Are Springtide. If you're enjoying the Voices of Young People podcast, we invite you to rate it, review it, and share it with a friend. Today's show was produced by Marte Aboagye. Audio was mixed by Andy Palmer. Opening description from Fardosa Dahir, and original music by Christian Unthank. Special thanks to the 12 guests featured in Season 9 and to all the young people whose perspectives and insights make our research possible. Thanks for listening.